Afternoon, colleagues. This is meeting number 120 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for Monday, November 26, 2018. I would just say that the committee, as you know, have already met in the first hour in camera. The second hour we are public and we are televised. And so I would encourage all of you to take these little devices right here, and for sure this week turn them to vibrate or mute. Last week I had it on off, and I thought I was putting it on mute, and I actually turned it on, and in the middle of the televised meeting my phone rings and it announces that my wife was trying to get a hold of me. So make sure that you have it on mute. We would like to welcome the Auditor General's office here this morning, or this afternoon. We're disappointed that our Auditor General is unable to be with us today. We look forward to seeing him back here again. But in the interim we have, and we're pleased to have Mr. Jerome Berthollet, Assistant Auditor General of Canada, Mr. Martin Dompierre, Principal, Monsieur Jean Goulet, Principal, also Mr. Philippe Legoff, Principal, as well as Ms. Carol McCalla, Principal, Ms. Casey Thomas, Principal, and Mr. Nicholas Swales, Principal. And so I will turn the beginning of this meeting over, and we look forward to your comments. Mr. Berthollet.
Merci. Monsieur le Président, j'ai le plaisir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to discuss our audit reports, which were tabled in the House of Commons last week. First, let's look at our audit of the Canadian Armed Forces efforts to stop inappropriate sexual behavior in the military. In August 2015, the Chief of Defence Staff launched Operation Honour, namely a top-down, institution-wide military operation to eliminate this behavior. He informed all members of the Canadian Armed Forces that he and senior leaders intended to change the culture in the forces and stop inappropriate sexual behavior. We found that Operation Honour increased awareness of inappropriate sexual behavior within the forces. After its implementation, the number of reported complaints increased from about 40 in 2015 to about 300 in 2017. The forces believed that this increase was a sign that members trusted that the organization would effectively respond to inappropriate sexual behavior.
Not feel safe and supported. For example, the duty to report all incidents of inappropriate sexual behavior increased the number of cases reported by a third party, even if the victim was not ready to come forward at that time. Also, the military police had to conduct an initial investigation of all reported incidents, even if the victim would have preferred to resolve the issue informally. This discouraged some victims from coming forward. According to information gathered by Statistics Canada in 2016, there were many unreported incidents of inappropriate sexual behavior in the Canadian Armed Forces. In mid-2018, the forces acknowledged that inappropriate sexual behavior remained a serious problem and that a significant focus on victim support and the use of external independent advice was required. Moving along now to another audit which also focused on national defence. It examined whether the department managed risks to Canada's fighter force so that it could meet Canada's commitments to NORAD and NATO until a replacement fleet is operational. In 2016, the Government of Canada directed National Defence to have enough fighter aircraft available every day to meet the highest NORAD alert level and Canada's NATO commitment at the same time. This meant that National Defence had to increase by 23% the number of fighter aircraft available for operations. This new requirement came at a time when the Canadian Air Force faced a growing shortage of trained and experienced pilots and technicians. To meet the new requirement, the government focused its efforts on increasing the number of aircraft. It first planned to buy 18 new Super Hornets even though National Defense's analysis indicated that this would make the Air Force's personnel shortage worse, and it would not help it meet the new requirement. Le gouvernement continue de miser sur l'achat d'autres.
The government's focus has remained on buying more aircraft. It is now planning to purchase used fighter jets from Australia as an interim solution to bridge the gap to 2032, which is the current target date for rolling out a replacement fleet. The Australian jets are about 30 years old and have the same operational limitations as Canada's current fleet of CF-18s. National Defence expects to spend almost $3 billion to extend the life of its current fleet and to buy, operate, and maintain the interim aircraft. However, without a plan to deal with its biggest obstacles, a shortage of experienced pilots and the CF-18's declining combat capability, these spending decisions will not be enough to ensure that the Air Force will have available on a daily basis the number of aircraft needed to meet the highest NORAD alert level and Canada's NATO commitment at the same time. Until National Defence knows how and when it will solve pilot shortages and get better combat capability, more aircraft won't solve its problems. Let's turn now to the results of our audit of physical security at Canada's missions abroad. Overall, we found that Global Affairs Canada had not kept pace with evolving security threats at its missions abroad. The department identified many significant security deficiencies and need of immediate action in a large number of missions. The department had known about several of them for years. Yet, it had not put in place all of the recommended measures to address them, such as improved video surveillance, alarms, and installing vehicle barriers at entrances.
Canada capital projects to upgrade security were at least 3 years behind schedule, usually because of weaknesses in project management and oversight. Because security assessments were missing or incomplete for some missions, Global Affairs Canada did not have the information it needed to prioritize investments on the basis of where they were most needed. Yet, the department is responsible for the safety of its staff working at missions abroad, and security upgrades to many missions are urgently needed. The next audit I'm going to discuss also looked at physical assets that the government safeguards on behalf of Canadians, in this case, the country's national historic sites and heritage buildings. There are long-standing problems in the conservation of Canada's federal heritage properties, and we saw few improvements since we last audited this area in 2003. We found that Parks Canada, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and National Defence either did not know how many heritage properties they had or did not know what condition they were in. As a result, the information they provided to the public or to Parliament about these properties were either incorrect or incomplete. We also found that conservation decisions were based on available resources and operational requirements, rather than heritage considerations. The money needed to maintain federal heritage properties was not always available. Les besoins ont dépassé les efforts au plan.
Needs have outpaced efforts when it comes to the conservation of federal heritage properties. Yet their number continues to grow. Because there has been no additional funding to conserve these properties, there is a risk that more may fall into disrepair and eventually be erased from the country's history. In another audit, we examined how Correctional Service Canada supervised offenders released into the community. The number of offenders released into community supervision increased by nearly 20% between 2013 and 2018, and the Correctional Service anticipates that this number will keep growing. The Correctional Service has largely reached the limit of offenders it can house in community-based residential facilities. As a result, offenders ready for release in 2018 had to wait twice as long for a space in the community compared to 4 years before.
Shows that gradual, supervised release gives offenders a better chance of returning to society as law-abiding citizens. Correctional Services Canada did not have a long-term plan to respond to its housing pressures. The audit also found that Correctional Services Canada did not properly support and supervise offenders once they were released into the community. For 19 of 50 offenders sampled, we found that parole officers did not meet with offenders as often as they should have. We also found that parole officers did not always receive the information they needed to effectively support offenders in the community, including healthcare information to prepare release plans. In our view, Correctional Services Canada needs to do more to supervise and support offenders released under community supervision. Correctional Services Canada must also plan to ensure that it has the types of community housing offenders need, where they need it, and when they need it. Passons maintenant à notre audit des efforts déployés.
Now we'll go to our audit about government efforts to make sure all Canadians have access to reliable and high-quality internet services. Many examinations of the state of broadband internet in Canada have recommended that the federal government create a national broadband strategy. But the government only agreed to take that step a few weeks ago, in late October, after we had concluded our audit. In the absence of sufficient funding, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada has been reluctant to put in place a strategy to meet the connectivity needs of Canadians in rural and remote areas. This means that almost 3.7 million Canadians have less access to important online services, such as education, banking, and health care. Moreover, they don't know when they can expect the situation to improve. In 2016, the department launched a 5-year, $500 million funding program that focused on bringing high-speed internet to 300 remote and rural Canadian communities. However, as a result of a number of weaknesses in the design of the program, it did not ensure maximum broadband expansion for the public money spent.
3.7 million Canadians in rural and remote areas has been further compounded by the way Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada has managed the radio frequency spectrum. We found that small internet service providers struggle to access the high-quality spectrum to support broadband deployment in rural and remote areas. For example, the department auctioned spectrum licenses for geographic areas that are too large for smaller service providers to bid on, and the secondary market for unused spectrum did not function well, partly because there is little incentive for license holders to make available for subordinate licensing the spectrum they are not using in rural and remote areas. And that brings me to the last of the performance audit in this fall release. The audit focused on whether Canada Revenue Agency consistently applied the Income Tax Act during its compliance activities. We found that the agency inconsistently applied tax rules when it audited or reviewed taxpayers' files, even though the Taxpayer Bill of Rights requires the agency to apply the rules in the same way to taxpayers in similar situations. There were a number of reasons for these inconsistencies. They included the judgment of agency staff conducting compliance activities, the region where the file was reassessed, and the type of taxpayer, for example, a small business or a large corporation. Taxpayers in one region waited an average of 7 months, longer than those in another region, for the agency to complete an audit. In one region, it took the agency more than 40 weeks to process taxpayers' requests for adjustments, while in another region, it took 12 weeks. En ce qui concerne les poids financiers,
When it came to the financial impact of the CRA's compliance activities, we found that the CRA did not know the full results of the work it undertakes to ensure that all taxpayers pay their fair share of taxes. The agency's calculation of the additional revenues resulting from its compliance activities, beyond the amount it initially assessed, was incomplete. The agency's number did not reflect the portion of taxes written off as unrecoverable from taxpayers. This means that the amount the agency reported to Parliament as additional revenues resulting from the extra funding it received from compliance activities was an estimate. And the impact on the government's fiscal results was therefore significantly less than the agency's estimate.
completed in Crown Corporation since the spring. These reports have already been made available to the public by the Crown corporations who received them. We audited the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Canada Development Investment Corporation. We found a significant deficiency related to board appointments in both the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation and the Canada Development Investment Corporation. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. We are now ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertolet, for that synopsis of the audit in its entirety that was tabled last week in the House. For Canadians watching, although they have given us a quick little synopsis on each chapter and each audit, the committee will now call those departments to come and to explain, in some case defend their action plan, and we'll make sure that it's followed up with as well. So the next 45 minutes isn't the only response that the Public Accounts Committee has to the audit. This is just kind of the appetizer of what's coming. And so now I'll turn it over the first 7 minutes to Madame Mendez and Monsieur Massé. Vous avez 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all for being here with us today, once again. And you've given us an overview of these reports from the Office of the Auditor General.
On one of the reports that, for personal interests, actually struck a chord with me, and that's the one on heritage buildings and the patrimonial aspect of our country. I was quite distraught to see that we pay so little attention to what little historic patrimony we have in this country. We are a very new country, so we don't have that many heritage buildings around, or even heritage areas, and it seems astounding that we don't give it or don't put emphasis on preserving and taking care of these buildings as they warrant, in my opinion. Je ne sais pas, bon, pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, je suis d'origine.
Those who don't know it, I'm of European origin, and it's very normal there for people to pay a lot of attention to these heritage properties. So I was very surprised and shocked to see the state of our heritage buildings. So first I'd like to know, is it strictly a question of financial means? When you talk about
Paragraphe 19 de votre déclaration, were based on available resources and operational requirements rather than heritage considerations. Donc, est-ce que c'est l'argent versus l'intérêt?
So is it a question of money versus public interest? Is that reason why we're neglecting our heritage properties so much? Thank you very much for your question, Chair. What we noted was that the designation process was strictly that. In terms of government policies and laws, this designation doesn't mean there will be an increase in funding for the conservation of this property. So department has to use its operational funds, like they do for all other buildings that are not designated, to maintain the heritage property. If the heritage property does not have an operational function, then based on the Treasury Board's policy, the departments are not required to invest to maintain them. So they're left to rot, basically. So I know this is hypothetical and this may not have been the object of your audit, but we could perhaps consider in Canada creating some type of historical society or an organization that could take care of these properties like they do in Great Britain or France. They put a lot of focus on conserving heritage properties there. They use public funds, but also they have creative funding structures as well so that they can support these properties. As a government, I think that we're obliged to conserve these properties.
Because Parks Canada is so much part of this discussion, it also goes to our environmental heritage and what we should preserve for future generations. So would it be something for us to consider as a committee to recommend to the government?
So we didn't audit that specific part, obviously. What I would say, though, is that we made a specific recommendation regarding designation and conservation. We're not suggesting that the government should be investing more funds to conserve the existing buildings. What we're saying is that there is a disconnect between designation and conservation. When you designate and you don't provide the funding to conserve, then you're just looking for trouble. So we've recommended that Parks Canada, with all of the other departments that have heritage building, get together and look at the designation process, but also considering conservation requirements as part of that. So that could include anything, including what you're suggesting.
Monsieur Massey.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go quick. Thank you very much for the work you're doing, and it sheds a lot of light for all parliamentarians and Canadians who are looking at these reports. I'm going to focus on one report in particular because my reports will discuss other ones. I would like to look at connectivity in rural and remote areas. I'm personally affected by this because there are 3.7 other citizens like me who have just basic internet access. And when I get up in the morning, when I'm at home, and I want to look at downloading La Presse, if my children are online, I have to ask them to get off so I can download it. So many people are the same situation as me. You says in your report, in the general message, that Innovation, Science and Economic Development was reluctant to develop a strategy without having the necessary funds. You said that Innovation and Science put $5 million aside to have the funds necessary for broadband internet access throughout Canada. But how come they're reluctant? How come they're reluctant to establish a strategy? Chair, this reluctance on behalf of the department is from them. They confirmed during our audit that they were unable to secure long-term funding to create a strategy that would allow all Canadians to be connected at a specific level of internet. So they just had ad hoc programs. Their last aspect of their program was ad hoc. The assistant AG said in his speech that there's more recent information from a few weeks ago saying that the government has accepted to create a national strategy. Is that what you're saying? To respond to the conclusions of your audit? Mr. Bretelet, is that what you're saying? Chair, the Minister of Innovation and did confirm that he would create with his provincial and territorial counterparts that they would create a long-term strategy for high-speed internet in Canada.
Extra 30 seconds. That's about as good a birthday present as I can give you today. November 28th, happy birthday. Monsieur Bessan. What's that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I hope,
you're right.
I hope the birthday wishes doesn't take out of my time by 30 seconds. So,
Go ahead.
thank you. And Mr. Chair, I want to thank our witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General for being here and for the great work that they do on behalf of Canadians and behalf of us as parliamentarians in making sure that dollars and programs are fitting the mandate of the Government of Canada. Now, I want to concentrate on Chapter 3, on the fighter jet study. And it was, as we know, early last week, there was a report that through access to information that the term capability gap never existed before 2016. Now, I noticed in your report that you never used the term capability gap. So I'm wondering, in the time that you did your research, if capability gap exists in the lingo that's used by the Royal Canadian Air Force, or is it strictly a misnomer used for political spin? Ms. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So in 2016, the government changed the policy requirement of how it wanted national defense to meet its NORAD and NATO commitments. In the past, national defense risk managed between NORAD and NATO. In 2016, it changed the requirement. It asked national defense to meet NORAD at its highest level and also meet NATO at the same time. That did create a gap that meant that national defense had to increase its production of aircraft by 23%. The gap, however...
Is the correct term actually operational availability, not a capability gap? Because you do talk about combat capability, which is different than operational availability.
What we're referring to, Mr. Chair, in the report actually is a shortage in pilots and technicians, and that's where essentially we found that there was a need to address. So with respect to that, National Defense was facing a shortage in pilots and techs prior to the 2016 change, and the change in 2016 actually made the shortage worse.
Right, and so in your opinion, as it's laid out in paragraph 32 of report number 3, you actually say purchasing interim aircraft does not bring national defense closer to consistently meeting the new operational requirement introduced in 2016. That almost reads like a recommendation. Why wasn't it?
The decision to buy Australian jets or to buy jets is actually a decision of the government, not a departmental decision. So we don't comment on the policy decisions of the government. We looked at the implementation of the policy themselves. What we found was that by buying jets, Australian jets, that wasn't going to help with the problems that they actually faced with respect to the shortage of pilots, techs, and combat capability.
It has been suggested to me that earlier on in the study that the Auditor General was looking at actually making that recommendation of not going ahead with the purchase of an interim fighter fleet.
We reported the recommendations that we have, one on pilots and technicians, and one on looking at investments in combat capability.
Would the Office of the Auditor General be looking at potentially following up on the study as it relates to the purchase of interim fighter fleet?
We're always looking at the risks and what audit work we need to work on in the future. So I would say that all topics are open for audit.
Do you believe that the policy change, when exactly, you talked about introduced in 2016, when was the exact date, or do you have that information offhand, that the new operational requirements were brought into place?
I'm going to say late December 2016, late 2016.
Late December 2016. Do you feel that because of the combination of both not enough pilots and technicians and aircrew, along with the change in operational requirements, is creating a crisis that wasn't necessary?
National Defense has carried out its analysis to determine what it needs, and it had identified pilots and techs as being a need, and so those are the efforts that National Defense has to take now.
So when I look at in paragraph 52 in the conclusion, you said National Defense has not done enough, in part because of factors outside of its control. Is the policy changes part of those factors outside of its control?
The two factors that we mentioned in that paragraph are one around the replacement fleet, the fact that they've been waiting for a replacement fleet for a while, and that that has not helped them in terms of getting the techs, pilots, and combat capability. And the second reason is the policy change in 2016.
Do you believe that National Defence and the Government of Canada doesn't need to spend $470 million to buy used, rusted out old Australian fighter jets?
Once again, that's a decision of the government, and we're only looking at the implementation of the policy and not the decisions themselves.
Much more time do I have? 2 minutes. So let's drill down on the combat capability, because that is something, my understanding is that did the Office of the Auditor General actually fly down to look at the condition of the Australians' F-18s?
No, we did not look at the condition of the Australian.
Did your office look at the condition based upon reports that came into National Defence?
We did not look at anything related to the condition of the Australian jets.
Okay. It's my understanding that the planes that Australia bought are just slightly older. They're a different block than the fleet that we currently have here in Canada that we bought from 1980 to 1982. And I understand that upgrading them to our standards is going to be quite a bit of work. When you look at the costs of upgrades, especially as you look at combat capability, our fighter fleet hasn't been upgraded in 10 years. I understand the Australians are even longer, plus the airframes are slightly different, so it makes plug and play a little bit more challenging. Has that at all weighed into the overall factors on whether or not the purchase is rational?
We looked at what it was going to cost to buy and operate the plane, so it's going to be about $471 million to buy and modify them. National Defence Analysis has demonstrated that they can modify them to be the same or very similar to the Canadian fleet, and they're going to spend about $558 million to operate them.
So, going back to paragraph 32, it says purchasing interim aircraft does not bring National Defence closer to consistently matching the new operational requirement. The government, after this report, after they were aware of the report, of course, and was tabled last week, they announced that they have officially signed the contract to buy the 25 Australian Hornets. Do you feel that they've ignored your advice in the report?
Oh. As I mentioned, the decision to purchase Australian jets is a government decision based on government departmental information.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison, welcome to our committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General's Office, both for being here today, and if anyone's seen the stack of reports, for the obvious enormous amount of work you do on behalf of the Canadian public. I want to ask a couple of questions about your Report 6 on Community Supervision and Correctional Service, and then also on Report 5 on inappropriate sexual behavior in the Canadian Armed Forces. In your introduction, Mr. Ridlett, you talked about correctional services having a delay in getting offenders into the appropriate facilities in the community, and acknowledging quite rightly, I think, that for community safety, the best outcomes come from that supervised release in the community setting, and that there's no plan to deal with that increase, which I think you said was nearly 20% between 2013 and 18. Wouldn't it also be true to say that this actually costs the public more, since the costs for maintaining someone in incarceration are much, much higher than they are under community supervision?
Mr. Chair, we did not specifically compare the costs. We do point out in the report that for about 40% of their population, they expend about 6% of their budget. Clearly, being incarcerated is more expensive than being in the community.
Okay, and the second part of your analysis talks about not properly supervising those who are released and not enough contact with the parole officers. And I guess I'm going to implicitly criticize your report a bit because you left out the context here of the 20% increase. So when you read it, it seems to appear that somehow corrections doesn't seem it important to have that contact, or that parole officers aren't doing their jobs. But in fact, don't we have perhaps the same problem in that we've had a 20% increase in the number of people being supervised without that same kind of increase in parole officers and the time they have to do that supervision.
We didn't attempt to understand why the parole officers weren't meeting with the individuals in question on the time scale. The Correctional Service establishes the frequency of contact requirements that it says are required to properly manage public safety concerns and also to enhance the integration of the offenders. So not meeting those in our view was not acceptable.
And I certainly agree with your conclusion about acceptability, but I guess I would just say that when we have an increase in the number of offenders, it's not just the physical facilities that have to increase, it's the human resource facilities for dealing with them that have to increase. In the interest of time, I'm just going to turn to report number 5 and congratulate you. It's the first independent report we've got on a very big task that the Canadian Forces have taken on, and that's Operation Honor. And I do want to acknowledge the good intentions of Operation Honor and the very large task of changing the culture of the Canadian military. No one would deny that that's a big task to take on. So this is the first external report on performance, and you've made some very specific recommendations on how we improve. But I have a question that backs up a step again, and I wonder whether you looked at whether adequate resources have actually been allocated to this program to achieve the very large tasks that it sets out for itself.
Mr. Chair, we didn't ask that particular question during the course of this audit.
Because I do think once we acknowledge how large the task is, that becomes an important question. Does the military actually have the resources? One of the things you talk about is inadequacy in the training of those who are going to operate the services under Operation Honor. And quite often when you have a gap in training, it's a lack of resources rather than a lack of knowledge that causes that failure in training. So I wonder if there's any relationship there. Did you look at why the training might not be as extensive as it should be?
Mr. Chair, I believe the military used a trained-to-trainers approach to their training process, and they ended up relying on the chain of command to provide the bulk of the training. So I don't believe it was an issue. It was not an issue of resources. It was really an issue of what the training was trying to accomplish.
So the recommendation really is then to look again at that system of training and see if it's effective?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we noted that the Canadian Armed Forces, this is paragraph 102 of the chapter, we noted that the Canadian Armed Forces has a new initiative called Respect in the Canadian Armed Forces Workshop, and this training was developed in collaboration with experts and is being delivered in collaboration with experts, and in our view provides a more complete way and a more complete approach to providing training within the military. And we're recommending that, they should make, as we put it, should make it a priority to offer Respect in the Canadian Armed Forces Workshop to all members in a timely manner, because it gets at the issues that we identified as being problematic within the training that was being provided.
One of the problems that you identified was quite often victims weren't aware of the services that might be available to them. And this is a question that relates to some of the work that we're doing in the Defense Committee where I sit right now. Is there a requirement that victim services are offered in every case, or are services provided on request to victims in this system?
Mr. Chair, I believe when a victim is first interviewed at the start of a formal investigation, services are offered, and the victim is made aware of the services that are available to victims. So the offer is made, and I think, I'm sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Well, if an offer of services is made, then how can there be a gap in the information? In other words, if that's the practice where a victim is always told of the services available, then how do we get this problem of victims not knowing what services are available?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but I should have also added that that's what is supposed to happen, but what we found in the files was that in fact it didn't happen.
Okay.
The victims were not being provided with this information. Right. So that contributes to the point that we made, that victims did not know about the availability of the services.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Garrison. We'll now move back to Mr. Area, please. Mr. Area, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll refer to section, para 7.70 and also exhibit 7.2, the actual versus the target. It is too good to be true. I think the targets are kept at the beginning of the year or just before the year starts.
They are set at the beginning of the year. They set the targets at the time.
Yeah.
Of
The
new-
2017-18, the target was $8.2 billion for additional revenues, and the actual was $11.6 billion. That is over 40%. So the question is that either they have been deliberately kept low so that they can show better performance, or the agency is not performing to its fullest extent. That's while setting up the target, they are not actually calculating the capacity that is available to the agency to collect additional thing. What's your opinion?
So in paragraph 772, we made some of these observations where there could be that the taxpayers become worse to comply with the Income Tax Act, or the taxpayers were able to underpay their income tax in 2013, and if you compare it to 2017, or the agency risk assessment process has improved. We asked the agency to give us sort of the methodology that they use to set up these targets, and they were not able to provide us the full explanation of how they come up with these targets. And that's why we made a recommendation specifically to that extent, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Exhibit 7.3, a lot of files closed during the last 3-4 months, especially during February and March. And you do mention that the targets may have pushed auditors to close files early. And you also say that the agency was unable to tell us the amounts of additional revenues reported that were actually collected from year to year. Do you think they're unable or they don't want to tell you?
Mr. Chair, we've asked a question and they did not provide the answer, so I would not even be in a position to say that they are withholding information.
Okay. Then I'll go to 7.91, your recommendation that Canada Revenue Agency should enhance its performance indicators so that it can fully measure and report on compliance activities, results, and actual collected tax revenues. I did go through the agency response twice, though it starts with the word agreed. Do you think they have agreed, and what measures they have stated here will meet the needs that you have recommended?
So basically, when we discuss these recommendations, we obtain from them their response specifically, and we challenge these responses in order to make sure that the agency is in a position to address and take concrete actions to address the recommendation. So basically, they committed and agreed, as you pointed out, that they would identify or enhance their existing performance indicators to better measure and report their compliance activities, results, and actual collected tax revenue. So we believe that the agency committed to address the concern that we raised in the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Area. We'll now go to Mr. Kelly, please. Mr. Kelly, you have 5 minutes. We're in the second round now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all to coming and for the work that you do to help parliamentarians execute their duties. I'm going to go back to the opening remarks. You had said that the agency, speaking on Report 7 on the Canada Revenue Agency, you spoke of the agency's calculations of additional revenue resulting from compliance activities, and the agency the agency's number did not reflect the portion of taxes written off as unrecoverable from taxpayers. Why? I mean, this is an ongoing and nothing new that a portion of taxes found will be unrecoverable. Why would that not be taken into account?
So, Mr. Chair, basically, when the agency calculates its additional revenue, it does not take into account the written off sort of activities of the agency. In other words, tax that will never be collected, when they do the calculation, they're not subtracting that amount from what they report to Parliament. So basically, that's what we observed, Mr. Chair.
Okay, but was there any reason given?
Basically, Mr. Chair, they don't have the information of the written off sort of dollars or amount coming out of these compliance activities. The total of amount that they have is for the agency as a whole.
Yeah, but they're all of their projections are based on estimates. Surely there can be an estimate of what is unrecoverable.
So, Mr. Chair, we've asked a question to the agency to provide us that breakdown specifically for compliance activities, and they were not able to provide us that information.
Indeed. I mean, I also note, as similar to Mr. Aria's comment about the agreement from the agency on its response. Under 7.86 in your recommendation that should analyze whether there are more accurate measures to track additional revenue generated. The response was to agree with you, and then in the next sentence say that they are satisfied that the Treasury Board, Secretariat, and Department of Finance are satisfied with the agency's current reporting methodology. Can you explain that, or do you have any comment on their response? They say they're agreeing with you, but then defending their current methods.
So, Mr. Chair, basically what I would say about that is that they indicated to us that they had approval from the Treasury Board and the Finance Department that the methodology that they were using was accurate, was good. We felt that using estimates to report back to Parliament was not maybe sufficient. In other words, they should consider other more accurate measures to track additional revenues generated from the budgetary funding.
Okay, are we? Okay, maybe I'll just, with the small amount of time I have left, I'm going to go to an earlier portion of the report where you noted the discrepancy between, you talked about the different types of taxpayers and breaking them down into those with income and assets over a certain threshold, those who do or do not have offshore transactions, and you pointed out that for individuals, so these would be Canadians without income or assets in excess of $250 million, and without offshore transactions, being limited to 90 days when there was a demand for production of documents, and yet other taxpayers that would include, and you say right here, those with offshore transactions are being allowed to have extensions for months or years, or even in the event of failing to produce documents, merely having the file being closed without any taxes assessed. Can you let us know what possible justification did the department have for that?
So basically, as you pointed out, there seem to be, when you're an individual taxpayer and you're being challenged by the agency to provide additional information about a receipt, as you pointed out, they're given 90 days to respond, and if they don't really respond or provide that information, they're automatically disallowed the receipt or the deduction, and they're reassessed. Whereas specifically when you look at offshore transaction, again, they can make requests for additional time due in some case to complexity and
complexity.
Thank you. We are well over, and I want to give Mr. Chan an opportunity to ask a question quickly.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question relates to the security deficiencies at the Canadian missions abroad, and particularly with respect to overall project management. It's my understanding, based on the AG report, that Global Affairs is responsible for overall project management, but they did not seem to have proper people in place. However, government is extremely big, and there is expertise in many places. Did you get a satisfactory answer from the department as to why that knowledge wasn't tapped into, why people perhaps doing a good job in project management in other departments were not consulted or brought over, or these positions were not filled with the great expertise that we do have out there?
Thank you. Yes, we did indeed ask Global Affairs that question because, as we point out in the report, they did have long-standing vacancies in their project management shop for implementing or developing and implementing their capital projects, which are necessary to put the security and to resolve the security deficiencies at missions abroad. What they told us was that there was a shortage government-wide in this type of expertise. And we noted in our report that Defence Construction Canada does have this expertise. We had done a special exam. Our office had completed a special exam of this agency. It's an independent agency that does defense construction projects mostly for DND, but is available to do those for the government with a special agreement in place. And we had found that their projects had been completed on time and on budget and in accordance with the requirements. So we had suggested to Global Affairs that they contact Defence Construction Canada, and they were in agreement with that. And actually, the folks in the shop had worked with them previously and had a favorable experience with them.
Okay. Thank you. I'm good.
We'll now move to Mr. Bassan, and I have one question left, and then our time is up, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to come back to report number 3 and compare that to the 2012 spring report, the fighter jet replacement program at that time. That was done by the AG. And you looked at everything at that point in time through the office of sole sourcing, life cycle costs, the policy itself, and as well as the Joint Strike Fighter Memorandum of Understanding. And then we look at this report where we are talking about sole source of used fighter jets, no comment. We are looking at, a plane that is used and needs to be upgraded, but yet we don't talk about life cycle costs. I'm just wondering why there's a double standard.
At the time of the audit, there had been no decision to buy the Australian jets, so we focused on the areas that we thought we were going to be most helpful to Parliament and to national defence, to look at the risks facing the current fleet, to determine whether or not it was going to be in a position to continue with the current CF-18 fleet until a replacement fleet came in. There was no decision to buy Australian jets or other jets at that time, so essentially there was nothing for us to audit.
So what would be the nexus then to require the proper evaluation of the new life extension program as well as the purchase of these Australian scrap metal?
So in terms of our audit process, we, as I mentioned earlier, we look at the different risks.
I'm talking about going forward.
Moving forward. Once again, our audit plan is evolving, and we will once again look at all of the issues facing the department and determine what the right audit is to carry out.
Because as a parliamentarian, I'll say it doesn't give me confidence when I see the way an in-depth dive is done on one report versus another one here that doesn't have the same depth of study nor the same type of evaluation of different mechanisms being employed by the government to either create an artificial or manufactured operational discourse and stress within our Royal Canadian Air Force, or the aircraft that they're going to bring in that will make things worse instead of better for our pilots and our air crew.
And just on that as well, a supplementary, when you did the audit, was the Hornet still in the mix? So that everything was done on it. That was the life operation that you did that?
So in terms of the decision to buy the Super Hornet, once again, that decision had not been made. It wasn't a final decision of government. So once again, we looked at the analysis that the department prepared, both in determining whether or not it was going to buy the Super Hornet, and in that case, it demonstrated that what it needed was more personnel. With respect to the Australian jet, once again, the decision had not been made by government, so there was no information in terms of the cost that it was going to take to audit.
Mr. Bertolet.
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll just reiterate something we often say to members, is that we always take members' concerns and suggestions into account as we go forward and determine which audits we will do next.
Writing to you.
Was that it, Mr. Bassett?
That is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. I guess just in closing, we come to inviting the departments, and starting next week we will have various departments before us. And as you know, our committee has been very focused on this data problem, and it's come up today. Madam Mendez and others, Mr. Kelly, have, I think, clearly expressed the frustration we have on this. And when I read, and as we look through these reports, again, it's of particular concern. When we see, for example, the one that Madam Mendez mentioned in Report 2, and I'll just quote straight from your report, in dealing with conserving federal heritage properties, in which you state, because we could not rely on the data in the organization's databases, we could not put together an accurate overview of the condition of federally owned heritage buildings and national historic sites. Then with Parks Canada and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, you said this: they did not have up-to-date information on the condition of their heritage buildings, and Parks Canada and Fisheries and Oceans didn't even have an accurate information on the number of their heritage buildings. I think, needless to say, this is rather disturbing finding, particularly given that these audits were done in 2000, there was previous audits in 2003 and 2007. But on page 5 of Parks Canada, you mentioned this: Parks Canada had an asset management database that did not indicate all its heritage buildings. We found that the database identified only 186 heritage buildings. The agency took over 4 weeks to provide us with what it said was the complete list of 504 heritage buildings. To you, is there anything, any way, any method that you have or that we as a committee have to, again, drive home, whether we have this little box in our reports drawing attention to the data, is there something more that we can be doing? Is there, given all these reports that we're seeing where data compilation, inadequate data, data analysis, you can't use the data because you don't know how to find it. Is there a way that you can send out almost like a shot across the bow where you know we're coming, you know that we want to see upgraded methods of access and retention of data? Is there something more we can do or you can do? Mr. Goulet.
So I think that what Mr. Bertolet mentioned earlier on is the question of management. In the case of the conservation of heritage building, to be very honest with you, it just wasn't a priority of the departments. However, we've stressed it to them, as we did in our previous audits, that we will be coming more and more for the data, because the data is really what allows us to have a clear view of what's going on within the different departments. If we come back over and over again and just find that the data is not good, I mean, the government doesn't look good. I mean, we just have to reinforce that over and over again with the departments, and certainly we are doing that as the Office of the Auditor General, and we are really appreciative of the fact that you're also doing it when the departments come in here.
So, you know, the old question, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? What comes first, the management will or the data? I mean, do you need the data? Is it just a complete, you know, determination by the department that this is the method that we are going to up our game when it comes to the data?
Mr. Chair, I think what we have found is that departments have data. They have lots of data. It often is in different databases. Sometimes it's on Excel spreadsheets. But what the department needs to do is what departments need to do is to put an emphasis on managing the data, figuring out what story they want to tell Canadians about the programs they manage and the way they run their departments, and putting together a process to put that data in an order that they can manage and that they can use, and that they can use to allow Canadians and members of this committee to understand how they are managing the programs and what the outcomes of the programs are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertolette. I think as we go forward here now with the invitations to the departments, hopefully someone from the departments will be hearing your message today and will come and give us hope and confidence that they're going to improve exactly what you've asked for. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for being here and helping us do that. Yes, I am optimistic that because I do believe that we have very good public servants, but sometimes they just need to be prodded a little bit. But no one is questioning the professional public servants that we do have. So thank you for coming and helping us with our job. We're now adjourned.